Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Our program is about to begin. Please welcome Semafor's Andrew Friedman.
Hello. Hi. Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of Semafor World Economy. I'm Andrew Friedman, General Manager and Head of Public Affairs and Corporate Partnerships at Semafor. We're absolutely delighted to welcome you all today. Semafor was launched 3 years ago at a time defined by information overload, eroding trust, and accelerating complexity. We set out to provide the antidote: fair-minded, transparent global intelligence for the new world economy. Semafor World Economy truly brings that vision to life. It is now the largest gathering of global CEOs in the United States, convening more than 500 global CEOs and hundreds of top leaders across business and government from more than 89 countries annually here in Washington, D.C. The discussions you will hear this week are driven by Semafor's global newsroom, who have gathered here from our bureaus in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Gulf. Our conversations will focus on helping leaders navigate extraordinary complexity by curating and servicing the richest insights, ideas, and diverse perspectives on the new world economy. This session, The Future of Global Finance, will explore how geopolitical shifts, evolving policy decisions, and changing capital flows are reshaping the global financial system and where opportunity and risk are emerging. I'd like to express our gratitude to Bank of America for their partnership on today's session and for being a founding partner at Semafor World Economy. We're grateful for their support in helping us create a place for independent, intelligent, live journalism. And with that, let's get to the news. Thank you all.
Please welcome Kenneth C. Griffin of Citadel and Gina Chon of Semafor. Please welcome Semafor's Andrew Friedman.
Ken, thanks so much for joining us on the Semafor stage again. And we're grateful Ken is a partner, but this is going to be an editorial session and a lot to get to given our state of the world. So Ken, I wanted to just start off with where we are in the global economy, just given all the volatility we've seen since the attacks in Iran, a lot of nervousness around the world, I'm sure among people in this room as well. How are you seeing this play out, especially for Citadel, which is such a major player in the commodities markets?
So the war in Iran is obviously one of the greatest geopolitical events of our lifetime. And the president has made the decision to pursue the objective of a nuclear-free Iran, which I think is an incredibly worthy objective. I applaud the president for trying to create a lasting peace in the Middle East, because clearly if Iran was able to build a nuclear weapon, we would see nuclear weapons across the entire region. And I think that could have dire consequences for the safety and well-being of the world. Having said that, we are now in the midst of an energy crisis. Everyone in this room knows that with the straits being closed, that the world's supply of oil has been severely curtailed, and for that matter, the world's supply of natural gas has been curtailed. And so we have a classic energy price shock unfolding across the world as we speak. That, of course, will create demand destruction. It will cause economies across the world to decelerate. The risk of a recession has increased. And central banks are making some really difficult decisions. Is the inflationary spike that this will create, will they view those transitory and leave monetary policy as is? Or will they view themselves as having to raise rates to try to keep inflation expectations well anchored? So this really is a very, very treacherous moment for the world economy as we navigate the consequences of trying to secure a lasting peace in the Middle East.
Well, we heard, at least some of us, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent say last night that this Iran situation is the epitome of a transitory situation when it comes to inflationary pressures. But we've seen, as particularly in Asian markets, the ramifications of what's happened in that region. Do you see the longer term effects, even if, let's say, the ceasefire and these talks that are unfolding actually lead to some progress?
Well, so the key is the progress will be measured by the reopening of the straits. From a geopolitical perspective, obviously, the agenda of a nuclear-free Iran is one issue, but from a macroeconomic perspective around the world, from that lens, the key criteria is the resumption of the continued flow of energy products from the Middle East without tolls, without harassment. That's the key issue for the world's financial markets. And I think that here in the United States, we are somewhat sheltered from the worst of this because of America's focus on energy independence. I mean, thankfully, the development of fracking, the robust use of a variety of fuel sources in America means that our economy is actually much more sheltered from the consequences of this energy shock than, for example, most of the Asian economies, or for that matter, Europe. Europe shut down one of their last great natural gas producing fields just a few years ago before the war, or as the war with Russia and Ukraine unfolded. So Europe is now beholden more than ever to the United States, to the Middle East for energy. Countries like Germany, like Italy, are going to face the brunt of this crisis in a much more profound way than the American people are.
So what is at stake for the global economy if safe passage through the strait is not guaranteed, and if it remains shut down for all intents and purposes?
I mean, let's assume it's shut down for the next 6 to 12 months. The world's going to end up in a recession. There's no way to avoid that. We'll see a rapid shift towards alternative fuel sources. We'll see wind, we'll see nuclear, we'll see solar, we'll see huge pushes to reduce dependencies on fossil fuels, but that's measured in years, not months. So we are going to see an acceleration of some of the historical trends that have played out over the last 10 years as the world rapidly tries to move away from fossil fuels, if we lose that very dependable source of fuel being the Middle East.
Yeah, and how has it been for you running Citadel in this very volatile period where the situation is just changing so rapidly? Have you just had some bare knuckle moments the last few months?
I've got an extraordinary team, and having said this has been an extraordinary period of time. So you really have seen markets go through quite a bit of chaos, and it's been unnerving on many days for all my colleagues and for myself, but this is what we're paid to do. We're paid to try to navigate scenarios like this. We're paid to assimilate and process information. We're paid to make the best possible decision that we can make. I think what has caught most of the world's financial players flat-footed has been the grit and the perseverance of the Iranian people. The Iranian military is still very much intact. The population is still very much under the control of the current regime. And the fact that Iran has continued to be able to demonstrate its resiliency under a massive attack by the U.S. is really quite remarkable. And to be clear, the U.S. military has achieved virtually every single achievable objective that you can from the air. I mean, this is by no means a criticism of the U.S. military. The U.S. military has absolutely delivered. We have effectively destroyed every single target that you can strike from the sky. It's much more a statement about the resiliency, perseverance, and grit of the Iranian military and the Iranian people.
Yeah, and all the drones and everything that they're launching against the region.
The missiles they still have in reserve, the mobile launchers, and the fact that they had put in place a very well thought through plan on how to distribute decision making under attack. So I think what is of note is that if we had waited several years to do what we're doing today, the consequences, I think, would actually be far more dire. So, for example, there's reasoned belief that the Iranian strike on the Qatari LNG fields was done by a missile that is able to change trajectory on impact. Missiles of that nature can evade the Iron Dome. Now, Iran can only produce a very small number of these missiles today, but if they were able to produce a significant quantity of these missiles, all of Israel would be subject to attacks of unimaginable consequences. And that would only be a few years down the road. Imagine Tel Aviv being struck multiple times by high impact, high radius of destruction weapons. It would be of profound consequences to the Western world.
Yeah. So despite what we're seeing today, if it had happened later, it could actually be much worse.
It could have been far worse. And that's one of the problems you have in leadership as the President of the United States is that the counterfactual will never be known. Right? He had made a very difficult decision about what to do right here, right now. The history has been forever changed. No one would ever know what the counterfactual would have been if he had not moved now, or for that matter, had struck their nuclear weapons production facilities last year. You know, it's well established within the defense space that the Iranians were going ever deeper in where they were locating both the weapons production systems and the centrifuges. We were quickly moving beyond the ability for the United States to actually strike them with any efficacy whatsoever. Like literally months away from the point where the Iranians would be able to continue the pursuit of nuclear weapons with no fear of attack by the United States.
So timing really mattered.
Timing really matters.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about your time here last year. I think for a lot of people who came to our event last year, who watched online, heard you talk about the American brand, you know, having been hurt, the idea of America being hurt in terms of its image around the world. When you're talking about presidential leadership and some of the decisions that have been made in the last few months, where do you see the American brand today? Has it been further tarnished because our allies are questioning our resolve, our dependency, or do you see it's in a sort of a status quo state?
Look, I think it's a brand that there's been both good and bad that has happened to the American brand over the course of the last 12 months. You know, for example, on the good side, look at what happened in Venezuela. Venezuela was unquestionably like a planet in orbit around China. And we went to bed one night, and that planet changed solar systems. It went from the Chinese solar system to the US solar system overnight, with no loss of American lives and very little loss of Venezuelan lives. It was one of the most remarkable regime changes in the history of the world, and the Trump administration pulled that off with incredible grace. Now, having said that, I think that probably created undue confidence that we could effectuate the same change in Iran. And I think we did a very poor job of messaging to the world the moral imperative for what has happened in Iran over the course of the last 50 days. We did not position this issue with the world through the right talking points, and nor did we bring our allies on board with us. And I think that was a mistake. I think this is one that we really should have worked with the Europeans much more aggressively to create a united front for the cause of peace in the Middle East and the cause of peace in the world. I mean, we have long taken for granted that we are in a world where you don't have to worry about the consequences of nuclear war. But when I was growing up in school, we had the drills where you'd go underneath the desk and duck in the event of a potential strike by the Russians on the United States with a nuclear weapon. Those memories are lost to the current generation of young people in America. And I think the president, being of the age he is, has an appreciation for just how important it is to live in a world where we do not have a massive proliferation of nuclear weapons into the hands of countries that are sworn enemies of our country.
And what do you think about also messaging to the American people? Because there's so much angst about where gas prices are, despite the America's production of energy resources ourselves. Consumer sentiment is at an all-time low, despite the labor market still being fairly resilient. What should the American people be told about where we're at, why we're doing this?
Look, affordability, which is a wonderful rebranding of the dynamics of inflation from the Biden administration, is really an issue that haunts the American household. We went through that period of extreme inflation through the Biden administration that diminished the purchasing power of the American household. And in particular, if you were a retiree and had a traditional portfolio with a substantial bond allocation, you lost a meaningful part of the purchasing power of your savings that you spent 45 years of your life accumulating. No one wants to live under the fear of inflation. And that period of material, substantial, sustained inflation under the Biden administration, the Trump administration and economic forces were bringing that down. But every time you see a price spike, it just sort of like puts you back into a state of fear that are we going to relive that diminution of purchasing power that we lived through during the Biden administration? So I think that's a real issue. Against that, unemployment continues to be low, which is good for the American household. But then the change coming from AI leaves everybody anxious. What do I make of my future earnings prospects when I keep reading the newspaper that AI is going to take my job away? So it's a very stressful period for the American worker. You have to worry about inflation. You need to worry about the changes that are going to ensue from AI. This is a moment in time where people just feel a lot of stress when it comes to the economy.
So one of the bodies here in Washington that is supposed to manage these issues is the Federal Reserve. We're waiting for hearings for the next Fed chair nominee, Kevin Warsh, and where that goes once he's in place, if he's confirmed. What do you think the Fed should do in this kind of situation? We've already seen a lot more debate than we normally see on the Federal Interest Rate Market Setting Committee. Where do you think, if he becomes Fed Chair, Warsh should take the board and how to manage this economy?
Look, the U.S. Federal Reserve has a very clear dual mandate: unemployment and inflation. And where we set interest rate policies intended to balance the tension intrinsic between the labor market and the strength of the labor market and how hot inflation is running. And I do believe that the president has made a great choice with Kevin to be the future Fed chair. I mean, he is well-versed in the underlying economic theory. I think he will make very thoughtful and independent decisions on behalf of the American people. And remember,
really independent, because there's been, others who have been names thrown around, including Kevin, who's, I think, changed his views a bit about inflation and, the role of the Fed. You believe he will be independent?
I think you'd share that belief, would you not?
I actually do, because I've known Kevin for a while, and I believe in the Fed as an institution is stronger than sort of political wins, but the political wins are pretty strong.
I mean, there's no doubt that this White House has been far more willing to jawbone the Fed than other recent administrations have been. I've written on the topic. I actually don't agree with that as a matter of policy. I think the Fed chair job is a hard enough job to do without the president sort of coming in over the top. Because to be clear, when you've got to break the back of inflation, you have to cost American employees their jobs. There's nothing that I could imagine to be more painful than to vote to cause people to lose their jobs. But if that's what's required to put the inflation genie back in the bottle, that's what needs to happen. So I think it's a job that when we politicize the job, we make it a far more difficult job for the Fed chair. And at the same time, I think there's something to be said when the administration is able to say, wasn't our decision. It was made independently by the Fed that we needed to raise rates. Yes, Americans lost their jobs, but that's what was required to put inflation back into check. Like that independence of the Fed serves both the interests of the body politic and the interests in the long run of the American people.
So it's for the greater good, essentially.
It's for the greater good.
Yeah.
It's like preventive medicine.
Yeah.
Like, no one likes to go to the doctor every year, but we all do because we want to live longer and better lives.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted, in terms of longer, better lives, you said recently in an interview, you talked about, life after Citadel and giving back to the country, opening the door to, possible government service. How are you seeing that in this kind of polarized environment that would still attract you, where we've seen, all manner of people come from Wall Street and become Treasury Secretary, have other jobs, and then this town is not an easy place to do business, if you will. So how are
first
you
of all,
thinking about
American business shouldn't happen in Washington. All right? American business shouldn't happen in Washington. American business should happen where American businesses are located. San Francisco, in Illinois, in New York, in Texas, in Florida, Mississippi, in Alabama, and the 50 states of the United States that define our great republic. American business should not happen in the halls of Washington. Washington should be here to support the vibrancy and success of American business with thoughtful regulatory policies and a willingness to keep their hands off American business. We don't want to be a nation of crony capitalism. Let's look at your question from a different vantage point as CEO of Citadel. I place great emphasis on my colleagues being civically engaged. I think it's really important that people have rich lives both in and outside of work. We have 300 colleagues at Citadel who serve on the board of nonprofit organizations. This gives them firsthand appreciation of the problems and challenges that are faced in American society. I think that makes them far better leaders at work, far more thoughtful citizens. We also actively encourage all of our colleagues to be involved in politics. Some of my colleagues are amongst the most active Democrat supporters in the United States. It's well known that I'm an active Republican supporter. When you actually tell people to be involved in politics, you know what happens? They don't have childish debates on policy. They have thoughtful discussions and debates. We need more of that in Washington. We need less polarization, and we need more thoughtfulness. And I really think that one of the things that American businesses do poorly when they discourage people from being involved in politics, they actually, in some sense, force the conversation into the land of the underground. And in that land, you see the worst of people. When you let people embrace the fact that they want to be politically engaged and active, you actually, I think, bring people's best characteristics out, and you get much more thoughtful debates and dialogue.
Well, speaking of debates and dialogues in our last moment, I want to ask you, going back to your comments last year about the American brand, you said it at a time when, frankly, not that many CEOs were talking publicly about the effects of the administration, the effects of what's happening in this town. Why speak out? Because there's been sort of a fear of, retribution, which we've definitely seen from the administration. Your Citadel is regulated by the SEC.
What retribution stories do you really have?
Well, I think tweets is normally.
Okay. I mean, I hate to say it. A tweet does not hurt me that much.
Yeah.
I mean, to be blunt, I kind of frame them and put them on the wall.
Yeah. They're badges of honor.
They're kind of bad. If the president cares about what you say,
yeah,
you're doing okay.
And to be clear, not retribution on you, but other CEOs
No, but I mean,
fear
in all
that.
seriousness, if the president cares about what you have to say, that means your message is getting out. And I do think whether it's a Republican or Democratic leader in the White House, you want the leadership of the American people to listen to the leaders in American business. The leaders in American business create the jobs, they create the tax base, they create the innovation, and all of us who are in American business have a responsibility to use our voices in our areas of expertise, to help advance the interests of our country. And when it comes to retribution, I'll tell you, the retribution I faced under the Obama administration was far more painful than a tweet. Whether it was the IRS coming in endlessly year after year with no audit findings but just harassment, whether it was E-Trade that we had bailed out in 2007 not receiving TARP because it would benefit a hedge fund controlled by a Republican money manager. That's retribution. I haven't faced retribution under this administration. I faced it under the Obama administration.
Yeah. And that's the difference.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
People are afraid of Trump because, to be blunt, he's a bit too bombastic for his own good often. But when it's all said and done, I don't have any stories of retribution from my friends in business from this administration.
Yeah. Well, Ken, thank you so much for using your voice here. Appreciate
Great
it.
to be here.
Please welcome George Walker of Neuberger Berman and Shelley Banjo of Semafor.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, George. Thank you guys so much. That was great. It's always hard to follow Ken Griffin, but we'll try. We'll try our best.
It's impossible to follow Ken.
Exactly. So speaking of another one of your peers, Peter Orszag called this a roadrunner moment for the economy. Like we're just about to maybe fall off a cliff. What do you think about that?
He said that here?
He said that here yesterday.
Wow. I missed that. I sure hope that's not the case. That would be bad. I think the world is in a bit of a scary place right now. The U.S. economy, though, is in a good place. You're going to see, I think, very strong earnings from corporates, up, low mid-teens over the course of the coming few weeks. Inflation is, perhaps ticking up a little bit, but in a reasonable place. I think the economy remains solid, which isn't to say there aren't. I don't know what the broader context of what Peter said. There are certainly a lot of left tail risks that are real and significant.
What about the Iran war and the oil shocks? I mean, you sort of were talking about duration there. Like, tell us sort of the timeline when you're going to be worried and when you're going to be okay.
Well, I'd say first, what happens there, a successful resolution to that conflict is infinitely more important to our kids and grandkids than what's going to happen in markets or even, frankly, prices. Markets in the intermediate term and prices in the near term. So at the end of the day, I'm most focused on, most hopeful that there will be a successful resolution to the conflict. In terms of what it means for our economy, I think the big issue is how long this goes on for. I think the economy is going to be fine with $100 oil through certainly through midsummer. As it progresses into early fall, it starts to become more problematic as strategic petroleum reserves around the world. We went into this with quite large inventories. As those get depleted, and there are fat left tail risks. Not a lot of us in this room were probably terribly focused on, and I can't even remember the strait off the coast of Yemen. The Strait of Tears had not been a large focus. That's a new left tail risk that's just been introduced in the past 48 hours. So there are risks. Valuations are not low. We have a big debt and deficit problem. We have a concentration problem in the context of the stock market. We've had a terrific wealth effect, which has all been linked to, in part been linked to AI and the stock market. So I think Peter is right to say there are great big left tail risks, but I sure don't think that should be the likely scenario, is to the extent that's what he was calling for.
We also had Bessent talk about maybe this is more of a wait and see moment for rates. Do you think that, we were supposed to have the Warsh hearings this week. I mean, it's sort of hemmed in. Can you just really not cut rates at this moment?
I think I think most investors and a little harder for, frankly, European central banks, given their inflation mandate and that they're in a fundamentally different position vis-a-vis their energy markets than we are. But I think for most investors, it's a bit a wait and see moment. And I think the same probably applies to the U.S. central bank as well. My expectation would still be that we get a rate cut later this year. But there are a lot of cards that are going to be turned over, particularly with regards to the conflict in Iran over the course of the coming month or two.
But how can you justify that rate cut?
You can justify a rate cut on the back of inflation abating, continued labor productivity gains from AI, which are significant and real, a weakening labor market. If you look at the Atlanta numbers, low expectations with regards to future wage pressures. The risk of a wage price spiral seems to be modest.
So you're joining Bessent on Team Transitory, which we've brought back into the lexicon again.
I'm glad that I'm not a central banker, but that would seem to be a prudent step. And I think hopefully the Warsh nomination will go swimmingly through the Senate. Hard to see much getting done in an easy fashion in our current political system and its hyper polarization. But I think markets would like to see a smooth, orderly transition, and I think are very pleased to see somebody in the seat who has as much experience as Kevin does. And
what happens if it doesn't go through? I mean, if Tillis sort of holds out, if Warsh, it sort of never happens, like for someone like you managing so much money, like don't you sort of need that confidence in the Fed?
Confidence in the Fed is super important. I think practically what will happen if it is delayed is that Chair Powell will stay in the seat a little longer. His term as chair, while his term as chair ends, his term on the board doesn't necessarily end, and he would be, I think it's called the pro tem chair for the intervening period. But that's in no one's best interest. I don't think Chair Powell wants that, and it's hard to see how that's in any American's best interest.
No one's best interest for him to stay on in a pro tem?
For this process to be disruptive and perhaps delayed would be super unfortunate.
Because what?
It doesn't inspire confidence. I think even most Democrats are looking at future Chair Warsh saying he is either he's the best candidate or the best candidate we could have received, and are sort of eager to move forward. The debate, and he'll obviously be hit hard with partisan attacks, as that's the nature of our system. But I think the real debate relates to Chair Powell and Fed independence, and particular AG who's been very aggressive.
Are you surprised we sort of ended up in this game of chicken between Trump and Tillis? Like someone's got to give at some point, right? Or find a way to save face?
That's sort of the nature of our system, unfortunately. Games of chicken seem to be part and parcel of our political and legislative process. I think what's more surprising is, if anything, I take the opposite side, which is how few games of chicken have been played by virtue of the fact that so much has been done via executive order relative to how much has been accomplished legislatively. But this is one where where the Senate has to act. The president obviously cannot do this unilaterally.
So speaking of games of chicken, this trip to China that we're supposed to be a month off from, do you think it still happens? It's already been pushed off once already.
I have no particular insight. I hope it happens. For eager to see our kids and grandkids grow up in a world of peace and better relations between the U.S. and China is a good thing for the world, not a bad thing for the world. So would like to think it happens. Obviously, I saw news when I was in the cab going from the train station here that a Chinese ship is trying to go through the blockade. There could be a number of events that may well lead to a delay in the trip. I don't know, but I think we all as world citizens would like to see those meetings take place.
And you were part of the Saudi delegation as well, right? When you went with Trump?
I don't know if I was official. I was with yes. I don't know if I was officially in the delegation or not. I was.
Sure. You happened to be in Saudi.
I was one of the muckety mucks
Yes.
in the audience, and got to spend time with MBS and the president.
And a lot of that trip was these big announcements, these proclamations, these investments. If we do go to, if Trump does go to China and bring some of the CEOs along, is it the same sort of format? Are you sort of expecting maybe something different? We had Besant yesterday talk about a potential board of trade between China and the U.S. What would you, as part of the investment community, what would you look for?
Yeah, I've not spent a lot of time looking into the travel plans of the president, and so I don't know. There, in that particular trip, the president was particularly focused on Saudi investment. We have other issues to resolve with our Chinese friends, and so my hunch would be that would be a smaller part of the mission. This wouldn't be about bringing back dollars for investment in the U.S. I'm sure that'd be a part of it. In the case of the president's trip to the GCC countries, that was a significant part of it, and we happened to have, as a big U.S. investor, happened to be one of the folks that the Saudis were entrusting with their capital to invest.
Let's switch gears for a bit to private credit. You guys are a major shareholder in Blue Owl. I don't have to tell you about what has happened to that stock price. Or do you regret holding on to that investment?
Aren't we? These are. I was hoping you were going to ask me about my favorite color.
We can get into that.
No, it's blue. Do we regret? So, for folks who don't know, our group called Dial was part of our firm that sort of built the industry around purchasing pieces of private equity firms and private real estate firms and hedge funds and other things. We contributed that to a vehicle that created Blue Owl. I actually then took that, we happen to be owned by 843 employees. I actually gave them the stock, and so the decision to sell or not rests with each of those 843 people, not with me. Do people wish they had sold when the stock was at 26 rather than 8.5? I'm sure they do. Do I have confidence in the Blue Owl team? I do. I think the private credit story, it's not even a story, it's like 10 different stories that can't seem to get out of the headlines. I think it's largely, I think it's overdone in many respects. I think there are parts of it that are absolutely real, and happy to talk about whether it's systemic risk, liquidity mismatch, challenges in the BDC structure, loans to software companies, any of the individual pieces. But if you were to read the headlines, you would think that folks have lost tremendous amounts of money And that's just not the case. Those guys, the Blue Owl guys, are very, very good at credit. And the stock's obviously been under pressure, but I have tremendous confidence that they're going to deliver for their clients and do fine over time.
Do you think all the focus on retail and liquidity is sort of misguided? Do you think that there's really an underlying credit problem?
So two different issues. Is there a credit problem? It's credit, right? Sometimes you're going to make money, sometimes you're going to lose money. Some people are going to be really good at it, some people are not going to be very good at it. We've had a one-way trade for a long time. It's been sort of a beta trade. Everybody in it has done well. And that's not the way the world works. And we're now going to go through a period where you're going to see very different performance from very different managers, just as you see in stock investing and in other places. So the historic default rates, in our private credit default rate, I think is 0.01% historically. That's going to go up. That's totally unsustainable. But I think when the tide goes out, we're going to see, who's really good and who's not really good, and that's fine. So that's an issue. The second issue with regards to liquidity, listen, the space grew a tremendous amount and attracted most of the alternatives into retail did go into yield-oriented vehicles, particularly private credit. When particularly Asian retail has an opportunity to invest in two vehicles, one a BDC, sort of a closed-end structure, which can trade at a premium or a discount, or one where you can get 5% of your money out, but that trades at NAV. When this goes down, there's a rush for the exits to sell this and buy that, and that's what happened with BREIT. When BREIT was priced here and their public comparables went down, huge selling pressure. It took a while to abate. Now everybody would say not a problem. I think we're going to see similar things in the context of private credit. So the 5%, and we don't. The problem is it's too new. It's grown too fast. We don't even have the right language for it yet. So I read all of these articles about gating at 5%. It's not a gate. Those are the terms. That's the liquidity feature. It's 5% in total will come out per quarter. Hopefully other firms will sort of stick to the 5%, and it is what it is. And investors are going to have to understand that when they allocate that capital. So
you guys sort of stayed away though from the real retail credit side of things. Is this sort of like an "I told you so" moment for you?
It is. I will never do the "I told you so" because as soon as I do, I'm going to get slammed for something else. We had the good fortune, frankly, of being in a position where we had lots of institutions who were happy to allocate capital to us consistent with our ability to deploy it thoughtfully. We didn't have the need to go and chase retail clients. But I think over time, retail will be a mix, probably a relatively small part of our business, and that's fine. I think it's actually, I think letting folks invest in people, for example, for their retirement savings, giving them the ability to have some of that capital be locked up for a period is a good thing, not a bad thing. I don't need daily liquidity on funds that I don't plan to use for 30 years. Now, we have to do it thoughtfully, responsibly. I'd like to see it as part of a target date fund, not people sort of moving in and out. Extreme democratization with unsophisticated investors will result in tears. But doing it prudently, thoughtfully makes tremendous sense.
I'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please welcome His Excellency Hadi Badri of Dubai Economic Development Corporation and Hadley Gamble of IMI.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome once again. My name is Hadley Gamble. I'm the Chief International Anchor for IMI, and it's a thrill to be here with you all this morning. And His Excellency, Hadi al-Badri, Your Excellency, I'd just like to ask you to give us a sense of where Dubai is today. How's the situation on the ground?
Well, we're open. The airport is functioning. We have 500 flights coming in and out of the city every day. We are, as Emirates Airline, our national carrier, operating to 85% of our coverage, our network. We have about 65% of the flights that Emirates used to carry pre this challenging period. But I have to say, it's been a surreal moment, a little bit unusual. And what makes it even more unusual is the fact that we've been going about our daily lives. We haven't had any disruption in terms of power, water, telecoms, banks, the things that you would expect to be in a good shape in Dubai, continue to be in a very good shape in Dubai. Our leadership are going to the malls, engaging with people, demonstrating that things are safe. My 80-year-old mother still goes for her daily walk to the mall. My wife and I are still able to order pizza and get it delivered in 15 minutes. So everything is good in Dubai. Everything is okay.
Your Excellency, in your mind, how does this end? Because obviously the conversations are ongoing, we understand, even though Vice President Vance didn't come home with a win. For the UAE specifically, how are you planning ahead?
This has been really a moment of amazing leadership that Dubai and UAE have brought to the fore. And I say that because we've been focusing on the here and now and making sure that we engage with businesses, and we've engaged with tens of thousands of investors and professionals to really understand what's on their mind, to really kind of extend the hand and also capture the voice of business. So here and now planning, but also really looking at what do we need to do to continue on our trajectory? Because the trajectory over the past few years under the UAE's plan, under Dubai's economic agenda, D33, has been really transformative. I mean, we have been accelerating in terms of GDP growth, in terms of FDI, in terms of the attraction of high-skilled talent. We were really on a good trajectory.
You were just removed from the emerging markets list.
Indeed, indeed. So, we view this as a little bit of a speed bump, but Dubai has a track record of coming out of challenges, and we're very excited about what we can do going forward, because this has been a forcing function for us to fix a few things that we wanted to fix.
Tell me this, 2008, you pulled out of the financial crisis, and then, of course, with COVID, you instituted something called a golden visa, which really was a great tailwind to getting businesses and entrepreneurs to come and set up shop in Dubai. For you, next step, what is this government going to do to get people to come back and to stay?
Yeah. Well, I think the good news is that people have stayed, despite what some tabloids overseas have been saying in terms of,
Do you count the Financial Times as one of them?
1 in 8 of a certain nationality have left. Well, what about the 7 of 8 that have stayed? And it's not just that they've stayed. They've stayed, like the government, we've worked every single day during that 40-day period. And the private sector followed suit, and people followed suit. So people have stayed, they've gone to work, they keep building. And we always say that Dubai is a place where you build. We are good builders. Of course, the skyline is a true definition of the case, but
when it comes to drones and missile strikes, and frankly, Dubai, they want to get those eyes of that huge international community. And certainly that does have a psychological effect on people. How quickly are you going to open the schools? What are you doing at home to reassure people that, business as usual?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is, hats off to our defense system and forces. I mean, what they have been able to achieve during that 40 days is incredible. It makes everyone proud. To be able to eliminate 2,800 aerial threats, and to do so where there's very little physical damage that has happened to Dubai. So to your point, it's more psychological than anything much. But families did go away for Easter break, and the fact that there's remote learning means that some of those families continue to operate outside of Dubai. But we use as a proxy domestic spending. And when we look at domestic spending and how quickly it's recovered, and the fact that we are only a few percentage points shy of where we were pre-28th of February, that gives us the confidence that there are people that are still in Dubai, staying the course, investing, spending, and living their daily lives.
Tell us about the foreign direct investment, because obviously as a huge part of your non-oil economy, you've been here in the United States this week. I mean, who's committing to Dubai for the long term?
Yeah.
Names.
Names I can't give. Names I can't give. FDI has been really an incredible component of Dubai's success. You know, over the past 4 years, Dubai has been the #1 city in the world for foreign direct investment. Our little city, and it's something that we're very proud of, we carry on our chest. Last year, FDI capital grew 50%. The US is the largest investor in Dubai, and 60% of that investment from the US is M&A related. This week, I've been engaging with investors, as I have been throughout these 5 weeks. I can tell you investors are staying the course. They continue to have confidence in us as a government. They continue to be excited about the opportunities that are presented, whether they're in development projects, in real estate, in the stock market, in M&A. We are actually looking to sign a few deals out of the US this quarter. I had a very productive call this morning with my team to push one of them. And so, you know, I think they're staying the course. What may happen, which is understandable, is some people may pause. But the commitment of investing dollars in 2026 and 2027 is still very much there. It's just about, okay, if it's not done in April, it might be done in June. If it's not done in June, it'll be done in September. But all indications we've received are that people are going to stay the course, and they actually see that there's a high potential for there to be better outcomes going forward.
Like what?
More accelerated growth. We continue to be a talent hub, and we're really seeing that play out across different segments. The connectivity that the government provides, you know, when we take a step back and we think, what's the role of government? In Dubai, it's very much about infrastructure, so digital and physical infrastructure, very much about policy making and being consultative in policy making, because actually the industry knows much more about an industry than we do. So we engage with them to understand what is it that they're trying to achieve so we can write that in policy and make that happen. And then the third, arguably most important thing is that we have convening power. We bring people together to be able to share knowledge, to identify investment opportunities. And that's what we're going to continue to do. And so people want to be part of the community in Dubai. They want to be on the ground. They want to be engaging, finding the next opportunities within the market, but then also to use the market to access other markets.
Tell me about this. Iran and the UAE have been traditionally very strong trading partners. Obviously, it's a major export hub for a lot of the goods that go through Dubai. In your mind, is that relationship at an end?
Look, it's hard to say, right? This is very fluid and can't really tell. From our perspective, running the economy, what's really important is throughout history, we have seen countries reduce the number of tourists that come in, reduce the number of FDI that comes in, but we've always focused on diversification. It's one of the things that we were very deliberate about doing coming out of the global financial crisis. And so for any country that doesn't contribute as a source market, tourists or FDI or trade, there are other countries that come in and fill the gap.
That's a significant gap.
But, you know, it has been in the past when there's been wars elsewhere in the world where there's been an impact on tourism and FDI and so on. You know, if you compare from an FDI perspective, the number of countries that were investing in Dubai pre-COVID versus today, we're up 65%. We have 60% of the world's countries investing in FDI. And here I'm talking about FDI that's not, you know, you or I buying a home. These are real FDI projects. And so the reality is to be able to increase the diversity of countries that are coming in from an FDI perspective, source markets from a tourism perspective, it's the same playbook for us from trade.
500,000 Iranians live in Dubai. Are they still welcome?
They're still there. They're still participating in the economy. They're still safe. I think the most important thing that we need to do as an economy is make sure that people are safe, whether they're residents or tourists. I mean, that's priority number one. And then we'll continue to engage, and we'll continue to support our residents. Our leadership recently came out and said, we don't differentiate between residents and UAE nationals. As UAE nationals, by the way, we're only 10% of the population. Everyone is an Emirati, which is the word that we use to talk about nationals. And our leadership say that because we want to make sure that the fabric of 200 nationalities that we have in Dubai, that have lived in harmony, that are contributing to what we are achieving as the dream, continue to feel safe, comfortable, happy.
Tell me this, and this is a question that I'm asked often about, is this a better time, in a sense, to come set up shop in Dubai? What are the incentives that you guys are willing to offer?
Incentives are there. We have incentives in manufacturing where we want to bring high-tech manufacturers to come in and set up factories. We have incentives in hospitality where despite having 150,000 hotel keys, which puts us outside of China second only to London, and we're going to surpass London this year, we actually need more hotel keys to be able to deliver on our ambition going forward. It's everyone's dream to holiday in Dubai, right? And I encourage everyone here to please do so, and we'll make sure that you're safe there. So there are incentives to be able to galvanize private capital to come in, because the formula of Dubai is really, as a government, to do whatever we can to support private capital to come in and invest in the city. And so is this as good a time as any? I always say it's never too late. We're a city that is growing well. Our population grew 7% last year. Our GDP grew 5.5% last year. And we continue to see very good visibility of projects, investment, and high-skilled talent coming forward for the next years.
And just finally, we saw the Crown Prince of the UAE in China meeting with Xi Jinping, his Chinese counterparts. Walk us through, in your mind, how we're going to see that investment case going forward, the United States versus China in Dubai specifically.
Our leadership are very wise on all things. One of the things that we have always taken as direction from our leadership is, why can't we be an and economy, not an or economy? And the philosophy is very simple, which is, why do we have to pick A or B? Why can't we work with A and B? And it's been a philosophy that's been passed down generation to generation. It's very much the same focus and same approach that we take today. We want to, at the end of the day, make sure that Dubai and the UAE works with everyone, is able to access partnerships, because it's partnerships that have allowed for the miracle of Dubai and the amazing growth of the UAE. And we don't want to be able to necessarily alienate one over the other. It's more important for us to work with everyone and to share with everyone.
And do you anticipate that we'll see the UAE working directly with Iran in the future?
Time will tell. It's a very difficult question to answer. But, hopefully we are positive people, we are determined people, and we'd love to be able to put all of this behind us so we can work on the fun stuff.
Your Excellency, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Please welcome Hari Gopal Krishnan of Bank of America and Andrew Friedman of Semafor.
Right. Hari, thank you for being here with us at Semafor World Economy, day 2. It's a busy week. Hari, as Chief Technology and Information Officer at Bank of America, you lead the technology strategy and innovation agenda at one of the world's largest financial institutions, including its AI deployment at scale across a workforce of more than 200,000 people. So you're deploying AI at meaningful scale across a very complex global institution. From your perspective, what distinguishes organizations that are realizing AI's impact from those in earlier stages of adoption?
Yeah, I think the big pivot from last year to this year I'd characterize in 4 dimensions. First is shifting from proof of concepts that were focused on small tasks to actual end-to-end process transformation. where you're going after big opportunities that are going to transform either revenue, client experience, or expenses. So for example, a year ago, we were happy with saying, let's give a developer a tool that can write some code for them.
Yeah.
Today, we have AI-first engineering principles where a business user can sit there with the technologist and write requirements in minutes, what used to take them weeks and months to do. Similarly, in terms of sales and customer relationship management, in the past, it took simple meeting transactions, meeting summarization is what we did. Today, we can understand prospects, identify them, create meeting summaries, help meetings, and the whole process goes from being days and weeks to hours. So the first thing you see is going from POCs, tasks, to much more process transformation. The second thing I would say is scale and reuse. We're trying to shift away from each individual team building their own things and understanding where we can build enterprise capabilities that can be reused repeatedly. The third piece is getting governance right. This stuff is very hard to govern. If you overdo it, you stall innovation. If you underdo it, you introduce a lot of risk.
Of course.
And finally, ROI. I think a year ago, we probably just said, let's try a bunch of stuff out. I think we're at a point where we say, well, actually, before we try a bunch of stuff, let's understand where this is going to take us from an ROI perspective.
Absolutely. So let's get concrete about how you've actually put that into practice. Rather than treating AI as a series of standalone initiatives, you've really emphasized building those, as you mentioned, repeatable enterprise-wide capabilities. How does that approach actually shape how decisions are made about what gets built, governed, and ultimately scaled at Bank of America?
Yeah, look, I think we think of reuse in a couple of buckets. The first is, do we want every person in the organization evaluating different models? Do we want everyone to start thinking about how do I switch models? Do I want everybody to think about how do I secure agents? How do I look for hallucinations? We don't think that's where value-added innovation comes in within a finance institution. So the ability to have technology components that can create standards and reuse has been hugely helpful for us. The second piece on top of that is there are functional capabilities that many business processes need. Think about speech to text. We have call centers, we have complaints, many areas where we need to understand what the human's saying on the other side. You have document management and document indexing. We have petabytes of documents sitting out there, knowing how documents operate, how they work. So what we think of is rather than build each of these things as discrete entities across the 3,000 processes we support, we look at building these as foundational things, and then on top of it, layer process by process adoption and transformation.
Makes sense. So with that in mind, let's talk about where the investment actually goes. Bank of America invests $13.5 billion annually in technology. Over $4 billion of that is directed towards new initiatives, including AI. How do you actually prioritize all those investments?
Yeah, our prioritization model is a combination of top-down, where we have a bunch of business strategies, right? We want to grow credit cards in the consumer business. We're looking to deepen across our wealth management spectrum. We're doing international businesses. Those are our top-down strategies. But in addition to that, we are holding listening sessions with our teammates. We have held over 100 listening sessions. We've generated about thousands of ideas where our teammates are telling us, hey, here's where I'm spending too much of my time in toil-based activities. I'm not adding value. All I do is go to 15 different systems. I copy and paste from different things, and I'm wasting my time. We marry the top-down and the bottoms-up and come up with the things that actually yield the best amount of returns, and then prioritize that against the $4 billion of new investments we're going to put out there.
I think we could all be doing that a little bit more with AI these days.
Well, I think the compelling aspect of listening to our teammates, it's amazing when we started that, how much we learned from them.
Absolutely. So let's zoom out a little bit here. As AI becomes foundational to really how institutions compete and truly how economies function, which capabilities or infrastructure investments do you believe will really matter most over the next several years to truly deliver that sustained impact from AI?
Yeah, I mean, first thing is data. I mean, you have to know who your clients are. You have to know everything you know about them, interactions, transactions, on us, off us data sets. So data is truly the fuel behind all the work we're doing around AI. And along with that, compute. These models aren't cheap. They're not inexpensive. They take a lot of hardware to run. So making sure you have your data and compute strategy, and along with it, understand the economics of what it takes to run these things. It's very easy to spend a lot of money and find out that you got nothing in return. Right. So getting data and computer right and doing the financial planning and the FinOps around it right is very important. The second piece in finance is obviously security and resiliency really matters. Yeah. Our clients expect us to be around 7 by 24 by 365. They expect us to be secure in a world where there are increasingly many risks that I'm sure the headlines the last week has captured. So that's important. Governance, getting the governance layer right so we know what we're working on, there's transparency, and most importantly, how does a human fit into the overall life cycle?
Well, speaking of humans, there's a real human story behind all of this AI, obviously. How has Bank of America prepared your workforce for continued AI adoption, and how do you see AI shaping really the future of work?
Well, I think the first thing we recognize is academia is still struggling with understanding how we equip students and emerging talent into the world of AI. And so for us, we view upskilling as a very big part of what we do. We've established at the bank something called the Academy. The Academy is focused on many things, but most recently focused on reskilling and upskilling our teammates on AI. We have a series of programs that go from level 101, basic prompt management, prompt engineering, all the way up to if you want to go much further in your career with AI design and development, we can take you all the way there. We use that to actually look at how we can bring talent that may not yet needed in certain areas, but then displace them to other areas. So for example, we see the glasses being half full. Back 5 years ago, you had to be a technical specialist in an area to work there. Today, if you're analytical, if you have good judgment, you can very easily be trained through prompt engineering to actually transport yourself into a different area and different functions. So upskilling has become a very big part of what we do. And just to give you a real example, 44% of our jobs in the last few years were filled through internal mobility. Not going outside, but just upskilling and hiring our teammates from inside the company.
Amazing. Well, I guess we have a few minutes left here. Is there one note that you would leave the audience with in terms of why you're optimistic about AI for the future for Bank of America?
Yeah, I think the opportunities around serving our clients is incredible. I mean, when I look at our clients' need in uncertain times to manage finance and financials, is just how to retire, how do I plan for my kids' college education, know me more than I know myself in a way through my transactions. I think our customers and clients are clamoring for great products, great service, to be fully integrated into their day-to-day lives. And to me, digitization and mobile banking was the first part of the journey. When you take that to the next level through data and personalization, and then you have AI along the way, I think that just makes it so great for us to be able to serve our clients better.
Absolutely. Well, all right, thanks so much for joining us here today, and thank you again for Bank of America.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Gene Hines of Wellington Management, John Rogers Jr. of Ariel Investments, and Thorold Barker of the Wall Street Journal.
Good morning, everybody. We've got only 20 minutes. I'm going to dive straight in. Gene, I want to start with you. We've had a pretty interesting few months with Iran. Obviously, this choking off of oil supplies, this huge disruption potentially to the economy globally if this continues. And yet, stocks are flat for the year, at least in the US and largely globally. So are investors right to be doing this, to be looking through this, or are they making a mistake here? What's going on?
Well, I won't say whether they're right or making a mistake.
In your view?
In my view, I think what is happening is that clearly the markets are discounting that it won't be long.
Yeah.
Right? Because obviously if this goes on for long periods of time, it will have major implications for the price of oil, it will have major implications for inflation and growth in the world. And so I think there's a wait and see. It seems like there's a wait and see attitude here where, and you do hear the administration talking that it will end. And so I think there's this period of, will that happen? Will it end? And will it be short term? But if not, then there will be implications, I would suspect, high implications for the markets.
But what is your perspective? What is the right answer here? I mean, should people be more worried about this in the markets?
I think if the war continues, then we will see impact on prices.
Okay.
Yeah.
John, what is your perspective? You've been through a lot of these cycles over the years. You know, these big geopolitical events, they create a lot of noise and a lot of anguish at the time, but when you look back at the markets, they tend to be blips in what's happened. Is your view that this is the same thing at this one, or is this a real different one because of the scale of the energy disruption?
I don't think this is a different one. We are big Warren Buffett believers, and Warren always reminds us that last century the Dow started at 66, ended at over 11,000. We had 2 world wars, Great Depression, president shot and assassinated. Horrific things happened, and our capitalist democracy is the best system ever invented, and we bounced back. So I think this is going to be looked at as a relatively minor, short-term problem. I also think because the midterms are coming up, the Republican Party can't stand to have this war last too long, and Donald Trump doesn't want to be impeached again. So I think that's going to be a catalyst to get this to end sooner rather than later.
And that's probably what the market's discounting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a stock picker. I mean, what's going on under the surface in terms of positioning? When you look at, the next year or so, you talked about some of the different things going on. There are some big trends happening in the world around demographics, around deglobalization and other things. And obviously we'll get to AI in a minute, but how are you looking at the different sectors and the different opportunities under the surface? Because while the market's flat, there's obviously been a lot of shifting between sectors and different performance.
Yeah, I would say a couple things. I think currently, the great investor, John Templeton, always said you want to buy when there's maximum pessimism. And right now, there's a lot of pessimism around what's happened with oil prices. We all know that. It's all over the news every day. So we've been adding to our cruise line companies. Companies like Royal Caribbean, Norwegian Cruise Lines. We think those stocks have gotten to be extraordinarily cheap. Norwegian in particular, roughly 7 times next year's earnings. It's really cheap. Everyone's scared to death. The worst thing you could think about is being caught in a cruise in the middle of a war climate. So that's a sector that we think is very attractive. We also think the healthcare is very attractive. What's been happening in Washington, what's been happening under RFK has put a real cloud over the industry. But ultimately that will, we think, change also, that there's going to be a shorter term phenomenon. You never know what's going to happen with these cabinet leaders we've seen the kind of transitions that have happened recently. And I think that would ultimately lift the real cloud over the healthcare sector. So we've been looking at companies like Charles River in Boston and other stocks that seem very cheap, Bio-Rad. A new one we've been looking at is Haemonetics, another Boston-based company. So we're looking at.
So you're seeing this as opportunity. You're seeing this more as opportunity.
Yeah. Exactly. We think it really is an opportunity to take advantage of the volatility in the market. Volatility should be our friend.
Yeah.
Make sense, Jean?
Yeah, as an active manager, I couldn't agree more that the more volatility and the more dispersion is an opportunity for firms like us who invest in research to really begin to differentiate.
Okay, so let's talk quickly about active while you're on that. So obviously one of the big waves of the last 20 years or so has been this massive shift into passive investing.
Yeah.
And this sort of links with the next topic. If you buy the S&P today, you're really buying a very high exposure to technology. So you're not nearly as diversified as you might have been in the past. At some point, do you get to the place where actually active managers become more attractive again, simply because the weight of money in passive means that the opportunity becomes bigger?
Yeah, so I feel particularly when you think about the US market, so when you think about asset allocation at our clients level, whether that's big institutions around the world or even individuals, they have a large exposure to the US markets. a large percentage now through passive, and they don't probably realize the bets they're making because they are so concentrated. They're not getting the breadth of exposure of the economy that they once used to. So I would say, as a firm, like the potential for active to really begin to, if you go back 15, 20, you talked about 20 years. If you go back 20 years, you had a period where passive really began to rise. Yep. That began to impact factors in the market. At the same time, you had QE, and that really reduced the dispersion in the market. And then just as that was ending, as you had QE ending, all of a sudden you had this real concentration in technology, and we're going to talk about AI. And so like you've had this massive headwind for active management, and I suspect in the future that there will be a renaissance of active management because the ability to, particularly, and I know we'll talk about this, like where are the profits going to be from that technology revolution? Are they going to stay with a few companies, or are they going to be broader? Are they going to be impacting a broad swath of companies in the economy? And if that's the case, then I suspect active management will outperform.
And are you seeing that? Is there evidence that that's beginning to happen or not?
I think what the evidence is, if we go specifically now to AI, I think there's strong evidence that AI is exciting, is having an impact. I mean, I can talk about what's happening in my own company, but I think we're hearing it from a lot of corporations. And so then the real question, if you take those corporations, and just as we talked about, they're trading at valuations that are much lower than sort of those large tech companies that are in the concentrated benchmark of particularly the U.S. The U.S. is the most concentrated benchmark. And if you get a productivity benefit, if you get an innovation benefit from AI that takes place across 20,000, 30,000 companies around the world, then that is not discounted in those stocks that are trading at low valuations. So even if you could still have the large companies doing well, but really if AI is going to be dispersed throughout the economy, it's going to benefit much broader.
So what you're saying, as I understand it, is if you look at the S&P, for example, there's too heavy a weighting in tech. The gap is too big on valuation with the other companies. Is that right?
Well, I think if you take tech, it's based on the fact that the profits of AI are now going to a small number of companies. Yeah. If the promise of AI is that it's going to be used by every company in the world, and there's going to be a productivity benefit, there's going to be an innovation benefit, those are not discounted in the valuations of those companies.
Okay, John, is it similar to what we saw in the late 90s where the internet companies, the tech companies got these massive valuations, but not only that, the old economy companies got discounted. So there was this kind of double whammy that the gap opened up so aggressively and then it came back together again. I mean, is there any hint of that history here?
I think that there really is a hint of it, more than a hint of it. Everywhere I go, and all of you, I'm sure it's the same, everyone wants to talk about AI. People are talking about how much money they've made it with their AI stocks, bragging about it. It's just very similar to the internet, at the top. And I can still remember the guy that delivers me pizzas, all he wanted to talk about during that period was how much money he was making with the internet stocks. And again, the same thing's happening today. So I think it's a real opportunity in the smaller cap sector that's really being neglected. They're being misunderstood. They're not well followed. The research isn't as deep because everyone wants to follow the big giant companies. No one cares about the boring, downtrodden stocks. So I think that's when you really get the opportunity. The valuation multiples are some of the largest in history between small value and large cap growth. So I again think it's a true opportunity for us. Always to look for small cap stocks. And I think when it does change, you'll see a dramatic shift. You'll see these smaller companies outperform the blue chips massively, the same way they did at the end of the century.
And have you got a little anecdote you can share that your modern equivalent of the pizza guy? Have you had that?
It's been what I've been seeing sometimes. I was at a Bears game, and there was a father bragging about how much money his son was making in some of these hot AI stocks.
Right.
Yeah, and so I see almost every day someone wants to talk about it. That's all they want to ask me about, and that's always a sign, I think, that you're getting toward the top.
Okay. Gene, one of the sectors that's been hit hard by this is software, and obviously it's sort of been a big catalyst for some of the challenges in private credit that we're all
Yeah.
discussing. Are these disruptions over-egged, or do you think that they are as extreme as people are saying? How do you see that? Sort of particularly, let's focus on software for the moment.
Yeah, so what I will focus on is what are we seeing with AI? Like, so what are companies seeing? So I think in any company where you can now replace, and I'm going to go back to what Wellington is doing, because I think that's where I have the most direct experience. So I know that we, in the last few months, have done 5 or 6 experiments with pretty complex processes, and you can now do them with AI. So that's really exciting. So I would say it's not one experiment. It's not doing it on something easy. It's doing it on something that's a complex process. And so I think if that's happening with us, it's happening across the board with lots of companies. And so then the question is, which of those companies that have had, I think that the issue with the software companies is that they were trading at very high valuations because they were considered to have really long-term moats. And so the question is, how will they be impacted by AI, and how will they adjust, and how will they adapt, and will they adopt it itself and be part of it? So it's just the uncertainty of something that was so set that they were going to have this major moat, and now you have a big question about that. It doesn't mean that all software companies will never be great stocks again, or that they'll lose their business. It's just that there's uncertainty created. Just like we talked about with the war, there's uncertainty in some sectors. But what I will say, based on our own experimentations, that we are pretty excited about using AI and generative AI to change a lot of processes.
I'm going to come back to you on that in a second, but just, John, when you invest in a sector or in a stock nowadays, is AI very much a driving part of the decision making and how you think about it?
It's really, really important to us. I'm a longtime trustee of the University of Chicago, and we have got a couple of the top AI professors helping to guide us, consult for us, to help us think this through, to determine which of the industries are most likely to be disrupted. We think it's really important to understand that. So some of our companies are doing well with AI, like we own the Sphere, the Las Vegas entertainment center. It's extraordinary, but they're using AI to be able to put the Wizard of Oz, the old movie, into the modern Sphere and make it work beautifully and do it very cost effectively. And each new movie will be more positively impacted by AI. On the other side, we're looking at all the companies like the professional services companies, the insurance brokers, the financial services titans, and seeing how AI is impacting them. Will the advisor, will the financial expert, will the real estate expert still be needed as much in the future? So we're spending a lot of time thinking through that, still believing that with complex transactions, you're still going to need that human interaction. But it's a question that we're spending a lot of time on.
Gene, how much are you using AI to make maybe too strong, but to help make stock picking decisions? I mean, how good is it?
So one of the things that we've done, and this is, I would say, we've been working on it in the last couple of years since generative AI has come on the market, is like, what is our edge? Like, really trying to figure out, similar to you, what's our edge? Our edge is our research platform. It's like the deep fundamental research that both in credit and in equities. And one of the things that we are saying, like, we want all of that IP. What is our IP? Our IP is we meet 20,000 company meetings. We have 20,000 company meetings a year. How do we get all that IP out of people's heads, out of people's models, into a place where we can really leverage generative AI? So we are there now. Like, that took a while to get a data lake and to get this done in a structured way to be able to use it. So now our investors, I think we're up to well over 50% of all our company meeting notes are in this data lake. It's on its way to 100%. From the end of the last year, it was at 5 or 6%. And so now if you have 100% of 20,000 company meetings a year, the ability to connect dots and gain insights, I think, is going to be one of our edges. So any portfolio manager could say, which companies around the world talked about this? And it will be at their fingertips. So that's what I'm very excited about.
It sounds like a great tool. Is there any proof, and I think this is always the question there, is there any proof of it actually helping at this point in terms of the results you're getting?
No, I think it will be over the long term. But like, what is our job? Our job really is to generate insights about the world, translate those insights into recommendations about what stocks to pick, and then finally how to put those and construct portfolios. That's our business.
Yeah.
So I am very confident that we will have more dots to connect than we have ever had in the past, because the human brain can only we're a super collaborative organization, and this is going to allow us to collaborate at a much better scale than we have in the past. So we have people going to meetings in Shanghai and Tokyo and in Luxembourg and in Paris, and all of those are getting out of people's brains and into a system. And the same is true for earnings models. So anyone in this business, you spend a lot of time translating all those insights into an earnings number, because in the end, the prices of assets are driven by the earnings of those assets. And those, again, are on people's computers. And we have worked for a year on a system where all of those inputs will be in the same model, in the same kind of data lake. So you can imagine being able to use generative AI and saying, these are our earnings estimates. 2 or 3 people follow the stock at Wellington. How are they different? How are they different than the street? So you're just going to be able to do it at a scale and a pace that's faster. And so hopefully that then will lead to insights and more confidence in insights.
John, I want to end with you, because we're almost out of time. One of the big things that people are getting excited about is a potential revival of the IPO market, with some big IPOs coming along, SpaceX, OpenAI potentially. How attractive are those from where you sit? I mean, do you think this is going to be a renaissance for the IPO market?
I do. I think this regulatory environment is going to, open up more and more doors for more public companies. So one of our favorite stocks is Lazard. We think they're well positioned to really benefit from more M&A in this country and around the world. So it's something where we're really leaning into. Another big, we own a lot of Carlyle, and we think they'll benefit from more companies going public. I think they're very, very well managed. So we'll continue to work hard in finding sectors there that are going to benefit from this regulatory environment.
So you think this could be a tipping point where you really open up the market for the future?
I really do. And it's not going to last forever, but I think it's an opportunity today.
Good. All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Please welcome Andrea Orchell of UniCredit SPA and Thorold Barker of the Wall Street Journal.
Apologies, I'm back again. And just for the record, I'm not at the Wall Street Journal anymore. I apologize. I was at the Wall Street Journal, so just for the record. Andrea, nice to see you. So we were just talking backstage in our 30 seconds, and Andrea made the question, does anybody care about Europe anymore? And by the way, I think it's an interesting place to start, because the talk out of the US is very much now Europe is this museum, there's no growth, it's sort of a rounding error, it's not worth spending our time on. And I just wanted to ask you, Andrea, what's gone wrong? Why has this happened? And have the events of the last few years around security, around energy, around technology been a wake-up call for Europe, or is it still not grasped the enormity of this challenge? Well, that's a big question, but
it's a big question. I would say that there is no denying that if you take the last 15 to 20 years, Europe has been consistently punching below its weight, and we have been talking but not crystallizing on the opportunity of a united Europe. But I do think, talking to many people here and to our own investors, that there is a feeling that it's almost Armageddon for Europe, and I don't think that that is the case, very far from there. I also think that we are at a point where the time is now, and Europe needs to grab that opportunity and convert all the value that is there.
So what is the bull case? I mean, if this room is thinking the same, which is, well, Europe's had its day, what is the bull case why that's not the case?
Look, if it's not the case, which is what you're asking, I think Europe has been adapting and, yes, drifting, but adapting towards a state where if you take companies like us, we are doing well. I mean, today, if you look at the Europe of today, my bank delivers a 20% return on equity, has a 38% cost-income ratio in a fragmented Europe.
Yep.
With all the limitation on growth and with all the limitation that we see. So there is a case that is not in the best interest of Europeans, that if you look at it over 5 to 10 years, it will further degrade Europe. Mm-hmm. And I sincerely hope that this is not the case, but I do believe that even in that case, the downside scenario is where we are, is not dramatically lower.
Okay.
But the upside scenario, if you believe that, if you ask anybody in Europe, is there a benefit to greater convergence, they will all tell you yes. If you ask anybody, how are we supposed to do that? They'll all tell you exactly what you would expect they would tell you.
Yep.
Put together your plumbing, put together banking union, capital market unions, energy, defense, and let the various countries thrive, but on a common plumbing, not on a fragmented plumbing. But then it has not happened because there are a lot of blockages to make that happen. There is
sticking with the plumbing analogy. Yeah, sorry, sticking with the plumbing analogy. Keep going. So, is this about regulation? Is it an over-regulation problem? Because I mean, if you look back at pre the financial crisis, the US and the European banks punched pretty much head-to-head on market cap. For the most part. If you now look at it, JP Morgan and Bank of America are worth the same as the top 10 banks in Europe, roughly. So there's been this enormous change in the profitability and the scale of these things. Is that about regulation? Was there an overreaction that just meant that the banks in Europe were too tied down and able to pursue some of the things that the Americans did?
I think before you talk about overregulation, which in my opinion is the case, you need to talk about lack of convergence. Okay. So the bottom line is that we sub-optimize for every nation of Europe as opposed to optimize for the greater European unions. And we have more barriers between European states than sometimes we have between those European states and the United States. So that prevents the opportunity. Mm-hmm. The trade barriers, the different tax system, the different legal frameworks, and yes, regulation. But I think it is, if Europe were to converge to a place where we would say, I can support and I can be different while putting to common denominator a lot of things that will allow me to thrive and create wealth, I think you would have all of the other things fall into place. At the moment, barring that, the greatest focus is on regulation. And because it is the sole focus, we lose some of the momentum.
And do you think, I mean, when things go wrong, there tends to be this view of, you need more Europe, you need to go closer together. Is there an argument that says, actually, you just need more competition? You need to allow these people to compete more freely and not just create more and more structures? Do you see what I'm saying with that? Because in a sense, I mean, we'll go to it. You're trying to buy Commerzbank, a German bank, okay? Yes. And you're an Italian bank, and you're one of the biggest banks in Europe. And this has been going on, what, 2 years? Something like that?
A while.
And they talk about this need for consolidation and efficiencies in bigger banks. And then when it's consolidation in their country, they're not so happy about it. So is this stumbling block something that can be got over, or are they not going to be willing to accept real competition in these situations?
I honestly think that over time, maybe having worked in both systems, I think Europe is slower. You need to be more patient, go through the motion, eliminate the misunderstanding, sell the case, takes longer. While in the US, you go right down to the middle and you take the decision. Not always the one is better than the other, but this is what it is. So it takes longer. For Europeans, that adjustment is a big adjustment. And sometimes it can be used with misinformation to project a case that is not the actual case. So the patient is required for us to eliminate the misinformation and to go without putting too much pressure on all the stakeholders through the case and make sure everybody understands that the case is in the best interest of everybody, adds value for everybody, and works. Probably in the US, we would not need to do all of that.
And 2 years in, how's your patience? I mean, how many more years are you willing to go for this?
You know, I said probably a few days after we bought our initial stake, thinking the next step was going to be a deal and realizing that we had a completely different environment. I said in an interview that we are and can be very patient, and we have been. We spent 18 months trying to engage to explain our case. And then now we put an offer on the table, which allows us to tangibly explain what is the benefit for shareholders, people, so employees, clients, Germany, and the European Union. And yes, we go through many more stakeholders than you would go in the US. But I do think that from a certain point of view, this is a good thing, because I believe that, for example, the success we've had at UniCredit is because you find an equilibrium between shareholders, your colleagues, clients, et cetera. When you don't have those equilibrium, sooner or later something breaks. At the moment, the biggest advocates of UniCredit are the people who work at UniCredit, notwithstanding that in Europe, in the past, it would have been, well, the bank is doing so well, that's not really good. Now it is, the bank is doing well thanks to us. We love the dream, we want to go further.
So if you had to bet 2 years out, are you still going to be waiting, or do you think there will have been, do you think you will have a deal? I mean, what are the odds?
Let's put it this way. I think that no differently from Europe, the time is now. The time is now for all of that rationale, all of those information to percolate down and for people to take a decision.
And is there any sense that this wake-up call that Europe needs has happened? Do you feel that there's a change of energy and desire to do some of the things that need to happen? Is there any sense of that in the conversation?
I honestly believe it has. And I think you're seeing debates and you're seeing arguments, if you want to call them that way, between European institutions and national governments, between governments, among governments, that lead you to believe that that message has gone through. Not everybody accepts it, but I think it is oversimplistic to think that nothing has changed vis-a-vis where we were, 4 or 5 years ago. A lot has changed in Europe vis-a-vis where we were, into the thinking process, into the priorities, into what the Europeans want to do. And I think people are less and less ready to accept stories that demonize Europe in favor of not converging. And you can see it in many examples across Europe at the moment.
And if you look at the big global banks in the US, one thing they all have is these very big investment banking operations. And that doesn't really exist in Europe in the same way anymore. There's Barclays that does a bit, there's Deutsche that does a bit, and obviously UBS. But, is that game now over in terms of there being big global European players in this?
I think it's difficult coming from that business to see Europeans able to catch up to where the US banks are in the short to medium term, if ever. I think Europe has taken a view before the crisis or during the crisis that investment banking and all that was related to it was a risky business they didn't want to be exposed to, and fundamentally compress that business for European banks. Rightly or wrongly, that's where we are. I think strategically for me, it was not the correct approach. You need to change the people, the metrics, the way you manage risk, but not eliminate a risk business that is absolutely strategic. But that's where we are. Rebuilding it from the ground up today is quite difficult.
Probably impossible. Yeah. So is the core issue then the risk taking, just the unwillingness, and this kind of plays into the capital markets problem in Europe. Just while here there's this sense of how do you build wealth, how do you take risk? In Europe, it's very much how do you avoid risk. I mean, is there any sense that that capital markets attitude, that willingness for people to take risk is changing? Because again, the other thing that it's not just the banking, it's the capital markets that are not as sophisticated.
So I don't think it is a question of taking risk, or at least not for Europeans and Europeans institutions, because if you look at it from another lens, most of the Europeans invest through normally US-based institutional investors or asset managers, and therefore through that, or they invest direct into the US market, into China, et cetera, they take the risk. I think what is being missed in Europe is that as opposed to having a well-functioning, efficient capital market that would vehicle the extra savings that Europeans have into European companies through European institutional investor and asset management,
going to the States.
They actually, by curtailing that, all of that flows goes through the US or other places and is less directed to support the transformation that Europe requires. So I do think that if you talk to a number of technicians and institutions in Europe, it is understood that if Europe needs to transform, and that is the machinery that needs to transform, banks and capital market are the gasoline. And in both, one, we're undersized. In the other one, we're underpresent. The two together means Europe does not have the fuel to do what it needs to do to get there. This is why it's starting to move, and you have that debate more and more, especially starting from the capital markets end, because it's the part that is less, let's say, that it's easier to accept on a pan-European basis.
And just final thing, 10 years' time, we're sitting in this room. Is there a significant chance in your view that people are talking about Europe's back, or is that?
I actually believe it is. There is. I believe there is because we are at a juncture where if you look, and I know people have said before me, but if you look at the talent pool, the education, the resources, we have 3 economies in the G7, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, if you look at Nobel Prizes, a lot of them are not in Europe because they had to go work somewhere else to become that. But we have all the resources to be there, number one. Number two, there is, in Europe, as in the US, a lot of pressure points in the population, between have and have not. But the advantage of Europe is that by converging, we still have a lot of value to create, to increase the wealth of the population. And instead of trying to address that mismatch through closing and through blaming others, we have an opportunity to converge and create that value, opportunities for people, et cetera. So I'm highly optimistic that over the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see Europe coming back.
Well, nice to end on a European note of optimism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Please welcome Steve Ratner of Willett Advisors LLC, John Toomey of Harbour Vest Partners, and Mohammed Sergi of Semafor.
That's a nice welcome. Thank you, Steve and John, to be here. This is a really fantastic panel, to be honest. I wanted to start with private markets because that's what everybody's talking about, at least in the beginning. And the main question here, and this is for you, Steve, is should investors be worried? Is this becoming a systemic type of problem that we have to look at?
Private credit, you're talking about. Look, private credit is, I think it's a well misunderstood asset class. I don't think people entirely grasp what we're talking about, nor do they grasp what the potential risks are, and there are risks from it. Private credit is not part of what we call the fractional banking system, where banks are taking deposits, leveraging them up, and lending them out. Private credit loans are extended from other pools of capital, some of which are pretty plain vanilla pools, some of which are in what are called business development corporations, which are public and do have some leverage on them. But we're not talking, in my opinion, we're not talking about a systemic risk of the order of 2008 or anything like that. There is definitely, though, risk in private credit. Private credit lenders got way ahead of their skis with respect to loans, particularly to software companies. They were making what are called ARR loans, annualized revenue rate loans. Essentially, they're lending against revenues instead of profits for very young software companies. Those software companies are now in the eyes of the storm around AI and where the disruption can be. And so there are real questions. So yes, there's going to be a shakeout. There are going to be a bunch of losses, but it is not systemic, in my opinion.
Yeah. And how about you, John?
Yeah, no, I see it the same way. I mean, if you think about conceptually, you have two systems, one which would be the historical traditional banking system that was funded by deposits, then levered, again, not entirely funded that way, or a whole new asset class where the risk is diversified and spread throughout. And as long as institutional investors, who are quite sophisticated in their own right, are allocating in a diversified way by manager, by industry, it's an entirely appropriate way to invest and to achieve excess returns that aren't otherwise available if you were to invest in a more narrow way. And I think, like a lot of things, I think sentiment speeds way past fundamentals, and I think that's exactly what's happening here, given two acute risks. One is the semi-liquid part of the market and the velocity of capital, because velocity goes both ways. And of course, those vehicles that had excess concentration in one narrow sector that is now getting re-rated.
But that, if I can just add one thought, that is why, coincidentally, the Department of Labor came out with a rule very recently with the idea of expanding access to private credit and private equity to individual investors. And this is exactly why it's a bad idea, in my personal opinion. I don't think individual investors who have enough trouble managing their money should be in the business of trying to untangle private credit with the illiquidity risks that go with it.
So I think
can I respond to that? I mean, I would say that you could actually look back to the Wall Street Journal Barron's op-eds in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and you would hear the same narrative about public equity market investing. And so I could just imagine the world today, imagine the whole retirement system if 401ks did not invest in the public equity markets. And I think what we're seeing in private markets is an evolution of alternative to mainstream. And I think we'll look back on this moment and say, as long as it's done the right way and risk is properly managed and processes are run well with fiduciaries, then I think there's a whole generation of Americans who should have access to the same things that Harvard and Yale and all of the other institutions have been investing in for decades.
So you and I disagree about this?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, you disagree about this, but I think on the broader private market growth. So you're saying it shouldn't be democratized, and I believe, John, you believe that this should be opened up, right? And if you can explain a bit about like why private markets, because they've grown so much, that most investors are not getting access to it. Is that the reason?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a structural reason. The whole foundation, at least on the equity side, has been 10-year closed-end funds. And so the way that institutions have built portfolios is by making years of commitments. Willett Foundation, years of commitments, right, benefiting from those returns. And so that's very hard for individuals to do. So we need alternative solutions. Now, whether you go in through a closed-end fund or in an open-ended, like at its core is diversification. In the same way, 401ks, mutual funds, index funds, ETFs manage equity risk by diversifying it. And I think those who don't, it's not It's not the asset class, it's the portfolio construction approach that I think is the real issue.
Well, the issue in my mind, which is unfortunately not one that's easily solved, is a flaw in the evolution of our retirement system. We migrated from defined benefit plans, which were managed by professionals and certainly could invest in private credit, private equity, whatever made sense, and there's still some of those around, legacy plans, to this system of 401ks and IRAs where we turned Americans into money managers. And I don't know how many Americans really should be money managers. Do you fix your own plumbing? Do you fix your own electricity? Why are you managing your own money? And so you get these array of choices with your 401k or your IRA, and you have to puzzle through all of them. And adding private credit and private equity, in my opinion, just becomes even more daunting for the average American to try to figure out.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. If you look at the big IPOs coming up, right? So for investors who are not in this space, who couldn't get in on with the private equity firms or the growth funds, they're going to lose all of that upside. So this is really a question to you, Steve. How do investors get in on that? And if you were to buy SpaceX now, it's very different than buying Google when it IPO'd, for instance, right? Like you're talking about, most of the upside is already gone. Markets are too frothy. How do we allow more people to engage in that growth?
Yeah, no, that's a complicated question because, as you point out, the returns in companies like SpaceX and perhaps Anthropic and OpenAI and things like that were all achieved in their private incarnation. And so the only way to do it would be along the lines of what I suspect John would advocate, which is allowing investors to invest in various kinds of funds that in turn would invest in these companies. I still retreat to my point that it is complicated for the average individual to figure that out. Plus, you're layering fees on top of fees in many cases, where some intermediary is investing in a venture capital fund, they're both charging fees, and by the time all is said and done, you may not achieve those extraordinary returns.
Yeah, I think any solution has at its core diversification. I mean, I don't expect individual investors are underwriting individual company stock when they invest in an S&P index fund, but they do benefit from those returns. So, I think the question that I've been posed recently is like, okay, well, if you think about the large IPOs that are coming, isn't this indicative of like, well, maybe people don't really need to have exposure to the private markets? But I'll remind people that the first $1.5 trillion of value, several $100 billion of value, all happened as a private company. Yeah. And I don't think any individual should only be investing in one company or even in one fund, right? Because one fund isn't necessarily diversified. But I don't know why we should preclude a whole generation of Americans from having the opportunity to benefit in the way of other institutions, as long as it's done the right way, which is, I'm sure, where Steve and I would agree.
Okay. I'm going to switch a little bit to the war. There was, I don't know if you were there last night when the Secretary of Treasury was saying another 50 to 100 days of, war or pain for 50 years of stability. You can agree or not or disagree with that, but last year we were looking at, everybody was expecting a recession. Right now we're sitting here, we're looking at, higher priced oil. How is this going to play out for the economy this year? Like, what does it change your outlook in a way? And I'll start with you, Steve.
Look, clearly it is going to add something to inflation. Look, first of all, let me just say, war is above my pay grade. I'm not here to opine on the right or wrongs of this war. But in terms of the economy, clearly it's going to add something to inflation. We should start out by recognizing that the U.S. is comparatively better off than pretty much any country in the world because we are a net exporter of petroleum products. We import some stuff, we export some stuff, but on balance, we're exporters. And so for our economy as a whole, it's actually okay. Unfortunately, the rewards and pain of that are not shared equally. Obviously, if you just look at the stock market, energy stocks are doing really well. There's going to be a lot of money made in the energy patch as long as these prices stay this high. And in turn, gasoline is over $4 a gallon. And so there's going to be a lot of pain felt by the average American, which will feed itself into the inflation index. The market is saying, if you look at the market is basically saying that instead of the Fed cutting interest rates twice this year, the Fed is likely to cut interest rates once or 0 times this year because of the fact that inflation is not getting back to its 2% target and indeed will get further ahead of it. I don't see, although you do see people starting to say this, I don't personally see a recession. The consumer has been exceptionally resilient throughout this period. It is definitely K-shaped. People at the top are spending a lot of money, and people at the bottom are looking for bargains. There's no getting around that, and that is not a good place for the economy to be as a matter of fairness. But in terms of the aggregate statistics, you're going to see positive GDP this year. You're going to see slow job growth, in part because of AI, which we can talk about. But overall, I think it's just going to be a little nick to the economy, not a major effect.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, when I think about, even the thought of an expectation of inflation can create inflation. And so I just think once you start to see inflationary pressures come in, it starts in one part of the market, it's really hard to have it seep out. So I think it's increasing the degree of difficulty for the Fed, because I think there's going to be just these cross signals that are coming in, and as Steve noted, I mean, we absolutely are seeing it's not one homogeneous economy, which is creating other issues into its own right.
Were you expecting the market to rebound from February 28th till today, like basically come back and shrug this off?
We say the market,
not the other market.
Well,
the one that we
that's
follow.
again back to the public markets.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look, so do you expect the Magnificent Seven to continue to charge along? Like, yeah, probably, right, before the AI intervention here on the software side, but the rest of the market, even in the last year, it's been an uneven performance. If you were to strip out those top 7 companies, like, it's kind of been flat, which I think is more representative. But we see the headlines and we see the overall growth of the indices, and so I think it creates maybe a false sense of positive sentiment.
All right, yeah, the dislocations happen somewhere else. I edit the Semafor Gulf, which I recommend everybody subscribe to. It's an amazing publication. They're all good. But I don't know how much, Steve, you go there, but I know that Mike Bloomberg has a very optimistic view, or had for many years. How do you view those countries? Like, how do they get back that confidence to be able to attract investors again? Like, what is required other than stopping the war?
Well, stopping the war would be a good start.
Yes.
Look, I think, again, I'm not in the war business, so I can't tell you exactly how that's going to end. But if it ends in some reasonable way, where Iran agrees to some set of conditions that the president is happy with, if the strait has to get reopened, I don't see any scenario in which this ends, in which the president retreats, if you want to call it that, without the strait opening. We have to get 20% of the world's oil out of the Gulf one way, plus a lot of other stuff, fertilizer and so on. If all that happens, I think you could see things normalize relatively quickly. There's still a ton of money there. There's still a ton of oil there. There's still a great drive to succeed and become part of the world economy. There's still a reciprocal interest on the part of investors outside of the Gulf of being there, because the old Willie Sutton joke, you go where the money is, and the money is there. So I could easily imagine things 6 months or a year from now feeling reasonably normal, but we've got to get the strait opened, and the president's got to come to terms with Iran on a basis that are acceptable to him.
Yeah. If you were to invest in, say, something like maybe that's not your portfolio.
What?
Invest like in a data center in Saudi Arabia or something of that sort. Would it require additional security measures, or there's a risk premium, or the valuations have to change? Is that become entrenched?
Today is probably not the day to offer me an investment opportunity in a data center in Saudi Arabia. We are going to have to get past this, but I think you make an important and good point, which is that when you look at investments, there's always a question of what's the risk factor you want to put into it. And part of the reason why U.S. markets do so well is because there is relatively little risk here compared to a lot of other places, China, for example. And so I do think, yes, I think it's a good point that we have probably added a risk premium to investing in the Gulf that will exist for a good long while after this ends.
And how about John? You're actually quite active there. You have an office in the UAE. I know there's some deals percolating around there. What is your view? So, money out. We know the Gulf states they're still sitting on $5 trillion of wealth of the top ones, but they also want money to come in. So how do you see this flow changing?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's think of a world when not if the war ends, like when, right? And none of us will know exactly what that timeline is, but even when it does, I do think there's going to be some lasting effects. So look, there's geopolitical risk everywhere.
Yeah.
It's more acute in some region than others. And I think some of the experiences we've seen in the last 60 days meant that maybe there's some parts of the region where maybe there was accumulating geopolitical risk that kind of came front and center. And I don't think that goes away overnight. Investors in the region have become important global investors to the overall ecosystem. And I think that will continue. I think it's inevitable, though, that there will be some balance between domestic investing and international investing that is a different mix than what was there before. Whether it was replacing existing infrastructure that has been damaged, whether it is helping support the local economy that might have been running at more of a full tilt with an expat community or tourism that I think was just going to take a little bit longer to get back. So important global investors, important region for us and for many other people in the business. But I do think the slope of the return is going to look a little different than maybe what we experienced before.
And your appetite for deploying, is that I guess you just have to pause until.
Look, I think we evaluate and assess everything. I think we will assess what we think is the appropriate risk premium for region, geopolitical factors, industry factors, company factors, management factors, manager who's making the investment. Across the board.
Thank you so much. That was really, we actually got some disagreement on a panel, which was amazing. And thank you so much for Steve and John.
Please welcome Harvey Schwartz of Carlyle and Ben Smith of Semafor.
Morning, everyone.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here. Congrats on an amazing event. Wow, you guys have you've taken over Washington.
Yeah, I remember you were one of the very first people to give us the time of day when it was just me and Liz Hoffman, begging for meetings a few years ago. But I guess wanted to start with Carlyle. You've been running the place for just a little more than 3 years, and your sort of central push has been to bring Carlyle, which was really fundamentally the Washington PE firm, back to Washington. How's that going?
It's going great. I mean, again, great to see everybody. I was super fortunate to get a call from the founders a bit over 3 years ago to join the firm, and everybody knows Carlyle, iconic name in finance, really, 40 years ago, almost a startup in private capital, which has now become a mainstream industry. But there are many unique things about Carlyle, which are really, really super special. But one of the very special things is it's just born in D.C.
Yeah, and I guess why, Washington, notoriously not a place until quite recently anybody wanted to be doing business.
Yeah, when the founders met, they got together, they strategically figured out how to launch the firm and why D.C. would be different. Actually, not true. So David was working in the White House and decided, David's not here, but he's told this story, many of you have heard it, and apparently he said to Carter, hey, there's no way you're going to lose to an actor in the election. And David said, well, apparently if you get inflation to 15%, you can lose. So David left the White House and heard about this thing, leveraged buyouts. Private equity didn't exist. But David's from Baltimore, as you all know, now owns the Baltimore Orioles. Bill Conway's from the area, Dan Daniello. So it was really an accident of birth. But it turned out to be uniquely defining for the firm because, as you would expect, some of the core things we do, like aerospace defense, national security, industrials, healthcare, these are all very mainstream Washington centric, geopolitically centric industries. And it was just an accident of birth that we ended up being here, but a fantastic competitive advantage for Carlyle and our teams.
And how has, are you seeing, there's obviously a lot of discussion talking about massive increases in the defense budget. Is that good for business? The sort of new kind of re-engagement of the U.S. government with the economy, basically?
Well, I think that there are major themes around the world. So I just turned 62, so I'm a fair bit older than you. In my lifetime, the themes that have really dominated capital markets, investment, business development have been declining interest rates, declining deflation, globalization. The Berlin Wall came down in '89, so we went through this period. Certainly, some very challenging things happened along the way. We had financial crises, but generally speaking, I'd say those were the dominant trends, including technology accelerating. Pretty much all those trends are slowing or reversing, other than technology, which is still accelerating. And so, hey, look, we don't root for global instability, but everywhere you go in the world, the major thematics have shifted. So national security is a discussion everywhere in the world, but it's not just about security in a traditional sense, it's about security around energy, amplified today by the events in the Middle East. But it's a security around energy, security around data, and it's traditional security around defense, but Canada's increased their budget, Europe, Japan, obviously the United States. And so this repositioning happens to fit areas of our expertise quite well. We're the only large-scale firm that's committed this type of capital, but it's going to require a lot of capital globally.
And we are in this moment, though, of a U.S. government, I think starting really more with the Biden administration, accelerating into Trump, that's very engaged with the economy, from taking positions in private firms to the defense spending. How is that? That can go one of two ways. That can be national renewal, or that can be cronyism and corruption. What are you seeing so far?
National renewal. So I don't think it's cronyism. I think that what you're seeing is prioritization around the world. Again, if we were sitting in Europe, the whole discussion would be about a reordering of priorities. And it doesn't mean, for example, that things like renewable energy, sustainability aren't important topics. They've just been reordered and they've been subordinated to other more important issues. And look, I think that there are times in economic history where government plays what feels like a more meaningful role in the economic design of what's happening. And so 2008, 2009, obviously very involved. Savings and loan crisis, back in the day, very involved. You had the Greek minister up here earlier. Obviously, post-2008, the Greek economy redefining itself. We happen to be in a period where governments are very involved economically because they need to be. And they need to be because priorities are shifting. And I think a lot of this is a trend that started in 2008. If we're all really looking back, and it's so easy to predict the future when you look back at it. But sitting back in 2008, that was really the beginning of deglobalization or global splintering.
Yeah.
And what does that mean economically, Ben? Is it means that more competition for economic capital. And economic capital to support business growth, which is really to support job growth and allow economies to grow in a stable, efficient way, that capital can only come from banks, financial institutions like Carlyle, we're one of the largest in the world, from the capital markets, or from countries themselves. The deficits are too large. So you need to have public capital in all forms, from the Carlyles, from the banking system, thoughtfully deployed, but you need policies to support that. So I think this shift has been in place for a while, and I just think, again, this is going to be pretty persistent for the next decade, possibly longer.
One kind of plot twist in the U.S. recently has been that venture capital has gotten very aggressively into some of these industries that they were typically, that for all sorts of reasons didn't make sense for them, that you guys have always been. I'm thinking of firms like Anduril that are VC-backed defense firms. Does that make sense for VCs?
Well, we're not in that business. Look, I think they're very smart people. They've had massive success in a number of industries. I think that to the extent to which technology is changing, there's certainly a role for early stage capital. If you, again, we only have 5 minutes, but if you went back to, for example, 2000, we've lost half the public companies in the United States since 2000. But the economy has grown dramatically. What capital has supported that growth? Well, the capital chain from very, very early stage venture capital all the way through to companies going public and being supported in the public markets, that dynamic has shifted, but companies have grown and the economy has grown dramatically. So we play a role at our part of the stage of the capital formation, which is really cash flowing. So that's the business we're in. We're not in venture capital, but there are super smart people in venture capital, and I think they'll figure out ways to create value for their clients. And I think it's a different, more speculative form of capital, but there's certainly a role for it to play.
Two questions about the kind of things to worry about. Scott Bessent, called a bunch of bankers in last Tuesday, worried about cyber and what it could mean for financial institutions. Not something you've worried about for a while. Can you scare people here a little? Like what is worrying you?
Was it before or after lunch? I think that depends on how scary you want to be. I would say the three things that are out there. I do think geopolitical risk is mispriced. So we have gotten accustomed to very unsettling geopolitical events sorting themselves out. When Silicon Valley Bank went out of business, the market responded 7 times more violently to that than when Russia went into the Ukraine. I would say Russia going into Ukraine, wildly more significant than Silicon Valley Bank going out of business, and I think we would have said that day.
You think the markets are too relaxed right now about it?
I think there's a complacency around geopolitical events because we haven't had a geopolitical event of severity in a long time. So I think it's something to worry about. Now, some of these things, as market participants, they're hard to price and they're hard to hedge. And so it's very difficult to assess that kind of risk. That's one. 2, deficits around the world. That's a mounting risk because we don't have a lot of cushion for the next unexpected recession around the world. And so we've backed ourselves into a corner, and so have all the other major economies. And then, of course, you mentioned technology, and I think cyber is a very significant risk because of the acceleration of all the technology and the tools today, and the speed of adoption just amplifies a risk that's been there for a long time, nation-state actors. It all ties in with geopolitical risk also.
But you're running a financial institution, but there are all sorts of, you're also deeply familiar with the kind of plumbing of the finance sector, all of it digital now. What worries you most?
I don't think there's a worry I have most. Our North Star, if you will, is, so we're only, for those of you who don't know, Carlyle.
I mean specifically around cyber.
Oh, I think it's the rate of change and investment in new technology and the pace of adoption that is creating, there's a lot of competition to adopt, okay? And so, for example, vibe coding. I don't know. If I ask you,
are you vibe coding?
No.
I actually vibe coded something that predicts mean tweets about my stories. It's very effective.
Okay.
You could try that.
So, okay, let's just say that became like a core part, I don't know if that becomes a core software because Ben uses it. Everybody adopts your software.
Right.
I don't know what.
It's probably not very secure.
Well, I don't know. I mean, where did you do it? Did you do it in your kitchen? Did you do it in the office with your technology people around you? By the way, what if Ben moves on to conquer a whole nother venue? I know this is your thing. You're not going to do it, but who maintains it when you're done?
Right.
So some of these things, I don't know. I don't want people randomly coding. Now, but for us at Carlyle, again, we're 2,500 employees. We have 750,000 in our portfolio companies.
Yeah.
So what we do there is we just try to make people, those CEOs, we assist them in their planning to share our best insights around cyber, geopolitical events, how to think about their capital structures. But I will say, not to sound dismissive, because you said be scary, when you actually look at those companies, and that is our North Star for what's happening around the world, the economy feels good, inflation feels controlled, policies are being effective, EBITDA growth is good. These other things are out there, which I think are real issues for us to be concerned about, hard to manage, but the core economic engine globally feels pretty good.
The previous panel, we're talking a bit about the Gulf, obviously a huge source of capital for these private equity businesses. Are you feeling or do you anticipate a pullback in the long term of Saudi, Emirati money going out of the country as they have to reinvest in their own economies?
I think when you sit and you talk to the leadership in those countries, it is extraordinary what they're doing to evolve their their economies in the most efficient way. I was at the first FII in 2017, and when you go back today, for those of you who were at the first one, it is remarkable the evolution in Saudi Arabia alone, just in terms of culturally, economically, the advancements. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing, their progression. And again, they're thinking in 10, 20, 30-year increments.
So you don't think this is going to be a pivot in terms of their strategy?
Oh, no, I think they're wedded to their strategies. At times they'll be exporters of capital, but they'll be internal importers of knowledge. I think there'll be destinations. I think we have to get past this unsettled period in the Middle East. And again, notwithstanding your comment about being frightening, I'm generally a glass half full optimist. I think we'll get past all this in the Middle East, and I actually think it'll be quite vibrant. But whether or not capital flows in or out over a short period of time, I don't think is particularly relevant.
All right, well, we're out of time. Thank you so much for
Great, Ben. Congratulations.
for sharing
Everybody, great to
this.
see you. Thanks so much.
Please welcome Austin Goolsbee of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, Gabriel Makhlouf of the Central Bank of Ireland, and Thorold Barker of the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you very much. Quiet, please. So, Austin and Gabriel, we've got a really important panel here. We've got central bankers from the US and Europe. So we've got two different perspectives on these super important issues we're facing. So I want to kick off with Austin. Given the disruption we've seen in energy markets from the war and the fact these might go on for a while, obviously we've seen inflation go up significantly. Are interest rate cuts, in your view, off the table this year?
Oh, geez. Okay. You got three.
Well, we've got to start. We've only got 15 minutes.
You got three deep questions on that. Are energy prices going to be lastingly higher, and for how long? That's an open question and an important question. What does that mean for rates? As you know, before there was the war, I was on the more optimistic side that there could be more than multiple rate cuts in 26. I just wanted some evidence that inflation was headed back down to 2%, that the tariff inflation was actually going to prove transitory. I think I have a little concern to pile this on top of inflation before the other one went away. That's a dangerous, slippery spot to be in. The longer this inflation disruption goes, the more likely it is, in my view, that the appropriate rate cutting would be put off. So I'm definitely going to say, if you go to the FOMC room, it's literally the biggest table that I have ever seen in my life. So I always say everything can fit on that table. I'm not taking anything off the table, but it pushes it out the longer this goes.
Okay. Gabriel, what have we learned from oil shocks in the past? We've seen in the 70s, obviously pretty profound implications for the world economy, for inflation, and mistakes that were made. You know, what should the European Central Bank be doing right now, in your view, in terms of learning from those mistakes of the past, and what should they take away?
Well, probably the single biggest difference between the 70s and where we are now is we've got an inflation target. And we're absolutely focused on delivering our 2% inflation in the medium term, which wasn't a world that we lived in before. Otherwise, we're dealing with some of the things that Austin just talked about. I mean, a supply shock that is not going to be persistent, that hasn't got a big impact, we should look through it. On the other hand, something that is going to basically take inflation off target, but not be persistent, we've got to be measured, I think, in how we respond. And something persistent that shoots us completely off target, we're going to take forceful action. So I think those are lessons that we've learnt from...
But okay, but persistent, what does that mean? I mean, even if we all hug tomorrow, realistically, this disruption is going to take a while to come out of the system, isn't it? They've destroyed infrastructure, there's stuff out of place. You know, this isn't just going straight back to where it was.
No, it's not. I mean, I think we are not going back to the status quo ante. I mean, we're not going back to where we were, but I think we're still trying to understand how long is this going to last? Not just the conflict, but the impact on supply. And not just supply of oil, but actually supply of a number of other things.
Sure.
Which are affecting, which are the sorts of things that I'm sort of worried about and looking out for.
So in the 70s, maybe they made the mistake of not tightening enough and letting inflation get out of control, and Volcker had to deal with that. But what is the counter risk, which is, if it is purely an energy shock and you've got a target that actually, if you raise, you just simply squeeze the consumers further. They're already feeling the pain from this, and you just squeeze. So
look, you're rediscovering what you were not rediscovering. You already knew, but you're reiterating why a stagflationary shock, that is something that makes employment worse and inflation worse simultaneously, that's the worst environment that a central bank has to face, because there's not an obvious playbook of what you do. Raising rates doesn't fix the problem, cutting rates doesn't fix the problem, and not changing rates doesn't fix the problem. So you got to, when the FOMC came up with the monetary policy framework document last year, we contemplated what would we do if we were to experience stagflationary shocks, and said, it's not a deep insight, but said, look, we'll look and see which side is worse compared to the target, and how long do we expect it to last? And that's how we'll try to think it through. I do think for the US context, there is one highly relevant thing that makes this a cousin to the 70s, but not a twin by any means, which is the US became a massive energy producer.
Absolutely.
So if this is an extended high oil price, some parts of the US economy are going to suffer. Transportation, logistics, the consumer is going to be feeling the pinch, and you will probably see some output rebounding in energy production. You probably see the investment in fracking ramp back up, and so the output impact of high oil prices is probably not as negative as in the US context as it was in the 70s.
So I'm going to come to you in a second, but just to stay with this for a second, one of the challenges the Fed has is it just made a pretty big mistake on calling 2021 transitory inflation. And so
I wasn't there, so don't blame me.
This was not, it's not personalized, but that's a real challenge, because they can't make that mistake again.
More than a challenge. That's a problem. That is burned in our brain as a nation, that there are big problems with the credibility for central banks making predictions about inflation that do not come true. If you tell people we're doing nothing at this moment because inflation is about to go away, and then it doesn't go away, you must have some accountability. Your credibility took a hit. We need to be extremely careful Anytime inflation is above the target for an extended period, you're already in a danger moment. Yeah. We've been above the target in the US for 5 straight years. In part of that time, we were making progress. So it is plausible to say we're above 2, but we're on the path back. 2025, we stalled out and stopped making progress. The argument was, yes, but that's from the tariff. That's a one and done. It's going to go away. This is why I'm afraid. If you add a big inflationary shock from energy before the other one went away, are we getting into an environment where the credibility takes a hit?
And we'll come back to the consumer in a second. We'll come to Europe in a second. But I have to ask one more question, which is, I think, important, which is, this incredibly difficult balancing act is happening at a time when the president is not shy of sharing his views on monetary policy. So what is your perspective on the risks for independence in this particularly challenging cycle?
Wouldn't you want to know what the Bank of Ireland...
We're going to this.
Look,
this is, I'm just putting you on the spot.
The Federal Reserve Act, by law, as you know, says that when the FOMC contemplates monetary policy, it's supposed to look at 2 things and 2 things only: stabilizing prices, maximizing employment. I've been at the Fed a little over 3 years now. I'm deeply impressed at the seriousness with which everyone sitting around that table takes the job. It doesn't say anything in the Federal Reserve Act about make the White House happy, make the stock market happy. There's nothing in there about that. So when there are critiques of the Fed, I try to be open to think through the arguments as much as possible. But at the end of the day, they're outside the FOMC. And that's not, the law requires us not to be responding to those things. Okay. We're supposed to be just the conditions.
It's going to be painful, but you're just going to dig in.
There's no bad weather. There's only bad clothing. That's a storm, and we'll get the right jacket. That's our motto.
Good luck finding it. Okay. Okay, well, just to go to you. Are we going to end up with? I mean, Austin just mentioned that the U.S. is now a very different economy. It's a net exporter of energy. It's obviously going to have some benefits and challenges from this. Europe is in a very different place. It's an importer. Could we see both sides of the Atlantic go in different directions in terms of how they approach this, do you think?
Possibly in the short term. But I mean, we started back in the end of February, we had inflation on target, we had expectations anchored, and we had our main policy rate at 2%. So we were in a different place.
Yep.
Obviously, we're in the same place right now because this energy shock is hitting everybody. But we also actually, it is worth for this audience just being clear, we've got a slightly, to paraphrase Tolstoy, all central banks are alike, but their mandates can actually be a bit different.
Yeah.
And our mandate is price stability. We haven't got a dual mandate, which the Fed has. So our mandate's very clear, price stability. And that is absolutely what we're focused on. So, I mean, it's not impossible that we're going to take slightly different paths in the short term. But in the longer term, we're playing the same game.
But to that point, if you have the situation where inflation is getting pushed up by this massive spike in energy, as you say, across fertilizer, other things as well, to what point are you willing to smash the consumer to get that back to 2% if that energy price is not going to be affected by that? Because you'd have to kill demand so aggressively to change that.
Well, we're going to have to. I mean, this is the particular tension that we've got right now, which is to make sure that we calibrate our response in a way that we don't make the problem worse. So I think in the end, understanding what is happening on the ground, understanding not only the direct effects but the indirect effects as well as the second round effects.
Yeah.
I mean, the job has become much, much more complicated. That's absolutely the case.
And it's early days, but are you seeing any sign of and I'll go to both of you on this, on the impact on the consumer? Because the consumer's already had a tough few years on inflation. So are there any early indications of how that's being felt?
No, well, right now, I think it's being felt by the fact that fuel prices at the pumps have gone up, and people are noticing that right up front. And certainly in Ireland, it's...
But are you seeing their behaviour change on the back of it, is what I'm saying?
Not quite, not just yet. I think it's a bit early.
What about in the US?
Look, in the US, as I say, the last 3 years plus, for all the talk about data center investment, absolutely the main driver of economic growth has been the just steady growth from the consumer rooted in low unemployment, progress. Incomes have remained growing relatively solidly, and they've been spending. If that catches cold, if that sneezes, then the economy is going to catch cold. There has been no stumble. The consumer has continued rolling along. There are a couple of cautions. One is, in history, and I said as soon as the price of oil went up, that I would not be surprised to see a significant downturn in consumer confidence. For whatever reason, people's consumer sentiment is very tied to the price of gasoline because it's a
plummeted.
Public price. And it has plummeted.
To the lowest level ever?
Like maybe ever. I don't know.
Which is kind of extraordinary.
So the question then is, will that sentiment, which is not unexpected, there's too many notes, that was expected. Will that translate into they actually stop spending? If so, then there would be a danger of a stagflationary recession. So far, you haven't seen that. The consumer just keeps chugging along, and you are familiar with the breakdown between consumer sentiment and consumer spending. That's been going for 5-10 years.
But inflation has gone up, right?
Inflation has gone up,
and people, consumers, do not like inflation. I mean, that's
an understatement.
If there's one thing you take away, that is it. So final thing, we have 2 more minutes, and I just love it, slightly changing topic, is we're talking about inflation. Some people, including I think the new Fed chair or the incoming Fed chair, should that go through smoothly and everything, talks about the sort of disinflationary impact of AI and the benefits of that. Just give a quick sense, both of you, of how significant do you see that being? Is that a big force?
I mean, personally, I'm one of these people who is slightly skeptical about the hype, but the reality that I'm also seeing is it's making some pretty impressive, I mean, just within my own bank, the speed at which some things can now be done compared to what is transformational. But I think I think there's a bit too much hype about productivity and job losses, because I think there might in the short term, we might see that. But I also anticipate that once we start creating new jobs off the back of that, there might be a slightly different picture. But that's my own view right now.
Final word?
I think productivity's up a bit in the US. I'm skeptical that it can be explained by AI so far, because AI adoption hasn't been big enough. There is one force going the other way to consider, which is if a bunch of the payoff from AI is to come in the future, and that's driving up valuations now, that people are going and spending out of this wealth that is premised on there's going to be huge benefits in the future. Let's just remember, you can overheat the economy in the short run. And the opposite of reducing the rates, you might have to raise the rates so that you don't overheat it right now. And I hesitate to call it a bubble because of the inner University of Chicago in me, but those issues of boom and bust and valuations and spending out of what's going to be future bounty, we better pay attention.
So do you think there's an AI bubble in terms of... No, well, you've mentioned the word.
That's what I said.
I wasn't going to talk about it, but...
There are high valuations, and...
I more mean the investment and the valuations.
Yes,
and if you put the two together...
If we find out that a la 2000, 2001, that the growth rate of the internet was going to end up being 10% per year, not 30% per year. That's still a very strong growth rate, but it meant in the short term, we got way overbuilt in capital. That is conceivable. That same thing could happen. Whether you call that a bubble or not, it's a boom-bust cycle that...
So that was sort of a soft yes.
I'm not, don't ever let the smart guy put words in your mouth.
Anyway, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for attending today's live journalism and to our partner Bank of America. We hope to see you here for our afternoon program at 1:30 p.m.